We've had Lokis bit by dogs. We've had Lokis in bathtubs, in flooded basements. We've had them blown up. The way people come up with to destroy your drone never ceases to amaze me. So it is a ridiculously robust drone that is also pretty easily repaired when it gets broken. You have to realize that for this market, it's going to be a full contact sport. So you've got to build an extremely robust drone.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 401. What makes a drone good for tactical use? For that question, we head to Laverne, California, to speak with John Becker, CEO and founder of AARDVARK Tactical, a leading provider of tactical equipment and custom solutions. AARDVARK Tactical has served leading defense and law enforcement agencies at home and abroad since 1987. The company finds, develops, and manufactures exclusively integrated products that excel in a variety of terrains and use cases, from personal protective equipment to tactical UAS, breaching technology, robotics, communication systems, and mission-specific kits. Its singular focus is to enhance operator safety and mission effectiveness. John has spent the past 4 decades dedicating himself to protecting tactical operators. He started AARDVARK Tactical when he was just 17 years old. The company started out as a climbing equipment business, often selling gear to SWAT teams and operators. After attending law school and working in police litigation, John realized that the best way he could serve tactical operators was by producing and providing high-quality gear and products that would enhance operator safety on the job. After AARDVARK's expansion and success, John founded Project 7, a provider of purpose-built, scalable, and configurable tactical platforms. John has had the privilege of working with some of the world's top law enforcement and military units, including the amazing leaders who guide their teams through some of the most dangerous situations and encounters imaginable. He has keynoted for many years on the leadership of elite units in what he terms culture-centric leadership. And he is the host and creator of the Debrief, a nonprofit podcast that shares stories of leadership under fire. In this episode of the Drone Radio Show, John talks about AARDVARK Tactical, the release of the new Loki 2 drone for tactical use, and the challenges and opportunities in the use of drones for public safety. But before we hear from John, I want to thank those of you who are supporting my funding campaign. Whether it's $1, $100, or much more, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. Go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And here's a reminder, the Drone Radio Show podcast and myself will be taking a summer off from doing new interviews. I'll be working on some things behind the scenes, doing some traveling, and retooling the podcast for the future. Look for new episodes in September. So let's learn about the tactical use of drones from John Becker of AARDVARK Tactical. Let's pick up the interview where I asked John to introduce himself.
My name is John Becker. I'm the CEO of AARDVARK Tactical Incorporated and the founder of a armor company called Project 7.
John, tell us about AARDVARK Tactical. What does the company do?
My job is protecting tactical operators. So AARDVARK does a wide variety of protective equipment geared towards tactical units, specifically SWAT teams, military special operations units, those kinds of units. And our gear ranges from, on the low end, we do armor, we do, communications equipment, we do less lethal, we do taser, we do a variety of things there, all the way up to more high-tech equipment, camera listening devices, drones, robots, and all those kinds of things. Anything that decreases the likelihood of a tactical operator being injured or killed on an operation is within the purview of what we do.
How long has the company been around?
So I founded it when I was 17 years old in my mom's den, and I'm 55. So I'm in my 38th year of working with spec ops units and SWAT teams. It started as a rock climbing company, and we started dealing with more special operations groups and SWAT teams, and the business kind of drifted in that direction. And I was very lucky in that I founded the business at a time post the 84 Summer Games when special tactics really began to expand in the U.S. And in 72, Munich had a terrible incident. And when the Olympics came to California in 84, there was a strong desire on the part of the U.S. government to not have any kind of terrorist incidents. There was a lot of funding provided, LAPD, LA Sheriffs, LA FBI, to develop the skill set for counterterrorism and hostage rescue, which then spread into special tactics programs all over the United States. And I just happened to get there right as that was, post 84, that began to expand. And also, the war on drugs and all of that. And so I arrived, I always say I'm tactical Forrest Gump. I arrived at the right time and fortunately hooked into the guys that were really thought leaders in the industry who spent a lot of time trying to make me smart and shared a lot of information with me and provided me with a lot of training that then allowed me to have an access and kind of a look at what my end user did that I wouldn't have had just as a normal business guy.
That's a pretty amazing history. About when did you transition from rock climbing into tactical gear?
I found it in 87. I'm 17, 18 when I found it. Then 3 to 5 year development where we're kind of doing rock climbing equipment, and then we're starting to do some less lethal stuff and some nylon gear. And then the business just pulled in that direction. We stopped doing anything rock climbing related and everything was tactical stuff. So it's probably early 90s. I went to law school in 91, 92. My last 2 years in law school, I clerked at the LA City Attorney's Office working in the police litigation unit. So I worked on the Rodney King case and the Reginald Denny case and a bunch of the SIS cases. And that's when law enforcement litigation, constitutional litigation was on the rise. So I happened to be in the right place there, which coincided with what I was doing. So I got out, I passed the bar, and then inevitably came to that point where it's like, am I going to go practice law or am I going to continue to do what I'm doing? And I really loved what I was doing and the teams I was working with and decided to, I still maintain my license, still an attorney, but this was what I saw as my life calling.
When did you add drones into the product line?
We started robotics. Let's start there. We started with robotics about 10 or 12 years ago, because what we started seeing happening was more and more prepared and trained adversaries where teams were at a tactical disadvantage. Anytime somebody has a room and they have control of it, whoever's trying to enter the room is at a tactical disadvantage. So we started looking at ground robots. We started working with Robotechs on a ground robot. And you could see drones had not yet caught, but I saw that as like, this is going to go somewhere. You could see the advantages provided by drones. And so it's probably 4 or 5 years ago that we really started in earnest the research. And, my goal was to find both an inside and an outside drone and try to integrate that not only into our product offering, but get the teams that we were working with to begin to understand. And at that point, I thought, one drone is probably enough. I now realize that's not even close to the case. It's been the last probably 5 years that we've been really working with drones and small robotics.
I was going to ask what makes AARDVARK Tactical stand out in the industry, but I imagine that 30 years of experience is probably the key factor. Anything else that has made the company a leader?
I think we're coming at it from exactly the opposite industry of the drone. Like we always say, like, we're not in the drone industry. That is not my job. My job is not drones. My job is protecting tactical operators. Drones are a means through which I can do that, as our small robotics and a variety of other things. So I think what makes us stand out in the industry is we're coming from exactly the opposite place. The majority of companies in the industry are drone companies who are transitioning into our industry because it's an expansion of what they're already doing. The expansion of drones was all personal, right? It was small photography and taking pictures of your kids and doing business surveys and, real estate photography. And that was what made it explode. But the tactical advantages of them became very apparent very early. And so you have a lot of drone companies that are coming into the tactical industry. We're the only one that's really coming out of the tactical industry to the drone industry and trying to pull it in to our team. So I think that's kind of one thing that makes us a little unique.
I suppose that for many of your clients, where you're already familiar with their tactical needs, it's a little easier to see how drones fit into their overall plans.
I think that's a fair way to look at it. My entire life has been dedicated to tactical operations and tactical teams. And so I look at technology as tools that fit into that tactical methodology and the tactics that our clients use. So I think it puts us in a unique place and gives us kind of unique perspective on the technology, because we really pride ourselves on knowing what our end user needs. We spend a great deal of time in the field with teams, going to their trainings, going out on operations with them, interacting with them, looking at what they need. And because we have a large outside sales force and we work with teams everywhere from the highest levels of military soft to small municipalities and everything in between, we do end up in a really weird place where we have this amazing kind of data stream as to what people want and how they're using it and how tactics are evolving. And I think that that's put us in a really good position to utilize the technology effectively and also to kind of cut through. The drone industry is not short on new companies and new drones. And there are about 8 million startup drone companies, and the majority of them are making nothing that is applicable to our industry. But they don't realize that until they get into the industry and start working with teams and realize, this isn't going to work. That's my biggest frustration, honestly.
Recently, AARDVARK announced the availability of the Loki 2 drone for tactical units. First of all, is Loki 2 manufactured by AARDVARK?
The Loki 2 is made by a company called Sky Hero, which is based in Belgium. We're the North American distributor for the product, the exclusive North American distributor. We're it. It's an interesting story. It's the way we found them is I'd started in earnest digging into drones and looking at them, looking at how they were being used and kind of talking to the different thought leaders on the drone side as to what was going to be coming to market in the future. Because nothing I saw fit really well. If you took DJI Mavic and tried to fly it inside, it's not made for that. And you can make it do it, but it wasn't made for it. There are issues with digital lag, with contact, with all of these things. And so I was approaching more and more people, doing more and more research. And a friend who's a longtime LAPD SWAT guy called me and said, "Hey, I just saw this thing that the FBI hostage rescue team is using, and I think you should see this because it's really interesting." And it was Loki 1. So Loki 1, the way Sky Hero started was Yves Capia, who's the CEO of Sky Hero, was approached by the Belgian national asset that the unit's called DSU or Diane, which is the top tier law enforcement tactical unit in the country of Belgium. So they're like FBI hostage rescue team of Belgium. They approached him to build them a ground robot because they were having problems with suspects hiding in places that, if you think there are a lot of places you can hide that it's not safe to go look for you. Attics, basements are obvious ones. And so they approached him to make a ground robot, which then turned into a drone. And he built a purpose-built drone called Loki 1. Loki 1 was not flight stabilized. It was hard to fly. It required a lot of skill, but it was a great drone, amazing camera, and purpose-built for tactical units. So we saw Loki 1. I met with Yves. Yves had a very similar upbringing to mine in that because he started embedded with the units and working with the units and being friends with the guys that were in the units, he was very focused on end user safety, which is what I really care about. And so culturally, we fit very well. And he said, "Look, I'm working on Loki 2. This is what it's going to do. These are all the advantages." Loki 1, you had to spend a lot of time flying it to be able to effectively use it. It's basically an FPV drone, almost like a hobby drone that was built for this purpose. Well, he partnered with Parrot, at least for a brief period of time, and developed all the software to do three-dimensional position fixation and built this thing for tactical units. And it's so far ahead of anything that it competes with that it was really clear that we needed to work together. And so that was kind of where the relationship began.
Did AARDVARK provide input to Sky Hero on the desired capabilities and use cases?
They were already working with, the top counterterrorism units in Europe, and we brought a lot of the U.S. units to the table and gave us the ability, would work with them as they would test things, as they would try things. We would take them out, test them, bring them back, say, hey, this is what the reaction was. What about this? Could we do this? And that process continues today. Yves and I were just together with one of the top national teams on the East Coast and doing training and literally taking pages of notes, even on the current product, which is amazing, saying, oh, it would be great if it did this, or what if we added this? And it's allowed them to expand from just a simple drone to now a drone, a throwable ground robot, a pole camera, and integrate them all into a single controller. So it really is a purpose-built tactical product. It's not, a drone that's being adapted.
I'm looking at it now on the screen, and it looks pretty rugged. It looks as if I could hit it with a bat and it wouldn't even phase it.
I always say that indoor flight is a full contact sport. And part of the thing that Yves got right from the beginning was the realization that you were going to hit walls. You're going to hit suspects. I mean, in the last year, so there are a couple thousand units worldwide that are using Loki. It is probably 80 or 85% of the tactical drone market, which has happened very quietly. We don't spend a lot of time talking about it. But the number, we've had Lokis shot with shotguns. We've had Lokis bit by dogs. We've had Lokis in bathtubs, in flooded basements. We've had them blown up. The way people come up with to destroy your drone never ceases to amaze me. So it is a ridiculously robust drone that is also pretty easily repaired when it gets broken. So it's kind of like you have to realize that for this market, it's going to be a full contact sport. So you've got to build an extremely robust drone and realize that it's going to break. And there are aspects of Loki's design that are designed intentionally to fail to protect the ducts that surround the propellers are designed to break before the frame does. So they take the energy. Just a really well thought out product. One of the best actually that I've dealt with in the last almost 4 decades. It's one of the best purpose-built products I've seen.
What are the key features of the Loki 2 that you feel tactical units would be most interested in?
I think the GCS, the ground control station, is amazing. It's able to operate up to 4 devices simultaneously. So you can have 2 drones, a robot, and a pole cam and run them all off of a single controller. You can then republish that with a series of wrist viewers that allow the entire team to get situational awareness of what any of the devices are looking at. You can also, because the devices are streaming directly, you can take a robot and roll it and look at a hallway, for instance, give somebody a wrist viewer, have them watch the hallway while the drone flies somewhere else. They made a lot of very conscious choices with regard to technology that are kind of counterintuitive in the modern drone market. So for instance, Loki is digital. It's analog. It's not digital. Everything else in the market is digital. Loki's analog. And the reason Loki's analog is because analog can't freeze. Digital can. And when you're doing something for real-time intelligence, for instance, somebody is barricaded in a room and you want to make sure that they don't leave the room and go somewhere else, you can't trust a digital image because it can freeze and the suspect could move. So they gave up camera resolution knowing that real-time intelligence is more important. The camera on Loki is capable of being in a completely dark room, like almost a zero lux environment, and seeing clearly. And it transitions from daylight to dark very quickly. And it's the same camera is used for Loki, the throwable robot, which is called Seguin, and then the pole camera. So you have this same sight picture through any of the devices that work in daylight, in darkness, in transitional light environments. Transitional light environments are problematic for drones, going from a very bright room to a dark room, for instance, and all of that happens seamlessly with Loki. So, it's a people hunter. That's the role of Loki, is to find people. We don't need a 4K resolution on the inside of a room. We need to be able to figure out where the suspect is. And so all of the choices they made were purposely designed to provide the highest use for the team.
The Loki 2 is also NDAA compliant. Remind us, what's the significance of that certification?
The United States government a couple of years ago became aware that a number of the products on the market that were made in China were publishing information to places that were not being disclosed. I'm trying to walk this line very carefully. So the accusation was that drones made in China and technology made in China were taking information from the drones and uploading them to servers in China. And that led to the US government taking a very aggressive stance, probably the most aggressive stance I've seen them take, on prohibiting technology from what they called covered countries, which really was kind of veiled for China specifically, to prohibit cameras, flight control systems, sensors from being used by US government entities. So the NDAA is the National Defense Authorization Act. That is where Congress gives the Department of Defense their money and their priorities. And the NDAA specifically prohibited the fielding of drones with Chinese technology in them. And so being NDAA compliant is essential if you're dealing like we are with military units and federal agencies. And part of that NDAA compliance is eliminating Chinese technology from the drones.
In Florida, we recently had a bill signed into law that prohibits the use of Chinese-made drone technology by public safety organizations in the state. It's creating a little bit of a scramble.
Yeah, and there are a number of states that are actually following. I mean, it's all an outgrowth of the NDAA. I understand the intent, right? The intent is good. We do not want, if you look at the extreme case, the extreme argument is that if everything that you are videotaping or taking pictures of is being uploaded to a server somewhere in China for the Chinese government to use as an intelligence source, you are crowdsourcing a great deal of information. And the way I explain it to police departments is, imagine if every time you had to serve a search warrant at a house, you could see every photograph that was ever taken in the house. Obviously, that's really valuable. From a Department of Defense or federal agency, but especially Department of Defense, my understanding was that it was special operations units that first discovered it because their phones were staying hot after they'd flown their drones, and they finally figured out that their phones were uploading the images off the phone to a server. That's the story. Whether that's true, I don't know. But let's assume that that's true. That's a huge problem when you're dealing with things like secret bases, military operations, things that you're scouting. Years ago, there was a secret base in Afghanistan that was revealed by Fitbit because all the guys were running with their Fitbits and uploading their data to Strava. And somebody was browsing Strava and they're like, what's this big orange square in the middle of the Afghan desert? Right? Because now hundreds of people have run thousands of laps in the middle of nowhere. So information like that is valuable and is dangerous. The challenge that was posed by NDAA and the state policies, the state of Florida being one, they were like, okay, fine, no Chinese technology. The problem was that DJI had done such an effective job of owning the US market with their technology. They were so far ahead of the US drone manufacturers that simply taking away the technology significantly degraded the capability of the agencies. And there wasn't, DJI was so inexpensive because they're in China, because they're aggressively supported financially. You look at what you get for $1,000 the DJI drone, it's staggering. And when we first became involved in this, looking at the outside drones and trying to develop something in the US, making a Mavic 2 was going to cost $4,000. And so the US drone industry was, the two big drone companies were DJI in China and Parrot in France, and then obviously Autel also in China. And so there was a nascent drone industry in the United States. Like, we were way behind. And even the companies that were making drones in the United States were using mostly Chinese parts. And so it was very difficult for those companies. When the Army did the short-range reconnaissance project and started the whole Blue UAS thing, it was very difficult for companies to compete with the technology that DJI had in their drones. And honestly, you can make an argument that none of the current American-made drones are yet as good as the Autels or DJIs. So the challenge is, state of Florida says you can't use these. Well, every agency that has already bought DJI has now spent their budget and are going to turn around and spend $8 or $10 or $12,000 to get a drone that may not be as capable as the Autel that they bought for $2,000. And I think that's kind of where we are right now. We're kind of in this weird transitional period where the US drone is standing up, but has not yet reached the capability of the DJIs or the Autels.
Do you have a sense of when the U.S. drone industry will catch up on both capability and price?
I don't think we'll ever catch up on a price comparison. I mean, unless the U.S. government decides that they're going to somehow supplement the drone industry, labor rates in the United States are staggeringly higher, right? I mean, that's part of our problem as a country right now is we like cheap iPhones, right? We don't want to spend $4,000 on an iPhone. So we're willing to buy a Chinese-produced product. And the same is true with drones. So I don't think price-wise we'll ever catch up. Technology-wise, I think it's getting there. We're still not there. But, you look at some of the products, Skydio is a fantastic product and is American made and, well-funded now with Wall Street and Silicon Valley money. They've taken the lion's share of the short-range reconnaissance market and the U.S. blue UAS market. They're still, I think, behind as far as optics technology, camera, FLIR. But I think now that you have a couple of strong U.S. manufacturers, you will see them begin to develop technology that is more specific for the American needs. And the pushing of DJI out of the U.S. market is creating opportunity for those companies. Pushing those companies out was an intelligence and information security based thing, but at the same time, it also created space for these U.S. companies to begin to produce drones and develop the technology to kind of move into that marketplace and become competitive.
Did the Loki 2 have to be modified to meet the NDAA standards?
The thing with Loki is that the components in Loki that were Chinese and had to be between the original Loki 2 and the NDAA compliant were more optics components. Loki doesn't share information. So Loki's a closed system intentionally. It doesn't push information to the internet. It doesn't publish anything. It doesn't record anything. Loki is an intelligence gathering device. It is not a video capture device. And that was made intentionally as a choice for this very reason. Because if you're storing things to the cloud, it becomes difficult to connect them. If you're recording, it becomes difficult to protect your information. So Loki was made an intentionally closed system that doesn't even update over the internet. Loki updates by hand. It updates with a SIM card. And that was done to create an air gap between the system and the outside world. So even pre the NDAA compliant version of Loki had received Department of Defense waivers, actually the Office of Secretary of Defense waivers that were required for Loki to be used by U.S. units, within the scope of an exception for NDAA.
Going back to the Florida legislation, the bill also includes $25 million to support local governments transitioning to other products. I don't know how far $25 million will go statewide, but at least there's some relief for public safety organizations.
Yeah, which is exactly what we need to do, right? If we're going to limit their choices, then we need to support them and provide them with the opportunity to use other products, because there's a lot of those agencies that already spent their budgets, right? They'd already bought DJI. And, there are a number of agencies in Florida that we were dealing with. They're like, what do I do now? I've got a fleet of, 12 DJIs and they have Mavics, they have, matrices and maybe they have Autels, and all of a sudden it's like, you can't use anything you do. Well, that's their whole drone program. And most of the drone is first responder programs that were using them, deploying from stations and other things were using DJI. And so, the governments need to, if they're going to ban those options, they need to support it, because really there's a trade that you're making there. You are trading public safety for information security. And it's maybe not as obvious to people when they hear it. They're like, yeah, that's a good idea. Ban the Chinese drones. Well, what that means is that somebody's kid's not going to be found when they're missing. Right? What that means is that a suspect is going to be in a backyard and a police officer is going to walk up on him and get shot because they're not flying a DJI drone and seeing the suspect. I absolutely support U.S. industry. I absolutely support us securing our information, especially against, near peer foreign adversaries. Like I totally get that. But we also have to recognize that draconian blocking programs that don't create exceptions or don't create vehicles through which the agencies can use it may mean that some of these agencies are losing that capability for an extended period of time. And obviously now there's a lot of money coming into the drone industry and there's a lot of lobbying going on. You don't have to be a math major to look up how much lobbying is taking place and who's doing it and why it's being done. And I think that there is a certain amount of intentional protectionism taking place to support the U.S. drone industry, because there's a lot of lobbying going on to pass some of those regulations. as a guy who doesn't come from the drone industry, I am more concerned about protecting a patrol officer that's searching for a suspect than I am the kind of protectionist policies that we're seeing. So I think we've got to find a way to, walk that line in a way that ensures, officer safety and the ability to find lost people and rescue people while at the same time securing our information.
In the public safety arena, what do you feel are the key issues that are going to need to be addressed?
I think there's a lot of things going on, but I think one of them is refining how we're going to use these things and then building purpose-built tools for them, right? I always say that a crossover SUV is because you couldn't decide whether you wanted a sports car, a truck, or an SUV. And to some degree, initial drones were crossover SUVs, right? You look at like a Matrice or a Mavic, or an Autel Evo, like those were drones that were made to do a lot of things pretty well. And initially, that was an amazing capability because for police departments, especially police departments that didn't even have a helicopter program, like the most basic drone it gives them an aerial camera and adds amazing capability. Well, now as those programs are beginning to get more robust, we're starting to see that actually we don't need a crossover SUV. Sometimes we need a sports car. Sometimes we need a moving truck. Sometimes we need a pickup truck. And so what you're seeing is agencies are beginning to specialize their taste in drones. And I think you're kind of at a point now where you need to have obviously good external capability in the small size. So, the Autel Evo or Skydio size drone. You probably need larger capability, Matrice size capability that gives you higher resolution cameras and better thermal imaging and, greater dwell time and all of those things. We're seeing more and more agencies that are starting to look at tethered drones to do, whether it's riot control or, sporting events or whatever, persistent ISR, persistent ability to put a camera in the sky and a thermal in the sky and give greater situational awareness to the ground commander. And then the tactical market is also obviously a separate area where you need to have something that's capable of finding people in dangerous places. And we're seeing more and more payload capabilities. Loki's capable of taking a variety of different payloads. We're seeing development of those payload capabilities, whether that's two-way negotiation capability or thermal or, lights and laser capability or diversionary devices, the ability to deploy chemical agents. All of those are kind of developing into tactical drone. So I think a modern law enforcement agency probably ends up with 3 or 4 different categories of drones. And I think within each of those categories of drones, we're starting to see refinement on the way they're used and the way they can be used. I go back to when the first time I got a cell phone. Like I never needed a cell phone until I had a cell phone. Now I can't imagine living without a cell phone. That's true of drones. Agencies that don't have them don't understand how valuable they are, and they start using them and realize like, oh my God, this gives me all these other capabilities. And they start to think of new ways to use them. So I think that's one thing that we really need to see is kind of the industry shake out and refine mission sets and then build technology around those mission sets.
Do you work with your clients in helping them identify the right drone for the right mission?
A lot of our job is to work with our teams and kind of help them provide, let's call it second tier thought leadership. Kind of here is what everybody else is doing. Here's what other agencies are doing and bringing best practices to the agency and say like, this is what we're seeing other people doing that are working. And a lot of my job as CEO and a lot of my sales director's job is connecting people together. Connecting an agency on the East Coast to an agency on the West Coast and saying, I know you guys are having this problem. You should talk to these guys. They've already solved it. And that is a big part of our job, is more of a consultative role of helping the agency refine it. Because, anytime you start a new program, you've got to figure it out and it takes you a while. And if I can put you in touch with somebody who does exactly what you do in a different place and has already solved it, you get a jump start on the program. And so we've spent a lot of time over the last few years doing that, pulling numerous teams together and bringing in somebody who has a robust program to brief. We do a lot of training on Loki and Seguin and the whole robotics suite all over the country with our partner for training, which is called the Regional Training Center, just providing agencies training, because you don't realize until you see how it can be used, all the different ways you can use it.
Can you share with us AARDVARK's reach in regard to public safety organizations?
Yeah, I mean, there are 18,000 police departments in the United States. We don't deal with all 18,000, but AARDVARK deals with thousands of agencies and kind of everybody you've ever heard of, virtually all the major tactical teams, all the national level tactical teams. We deal with units all over the world. Really, since our focus is tactical, it narrows the field a little bit, but it's thousands of agencies. And, we have inside and outside salespeople that have regional areas that deal with that. And so within that region, they will try and share information, and then they will bring that in to the organization.
And over time, some of these agencies develop strong expertise and knowledge that can be of value to other organizations. Do you have any examples?
Right, you can see what has happened with Chula Vista as a perfect example of an agency that was very early in drones, right? Chula Vista is a not so big PD in a small kind of very, out of the way part of California. But, if you look at modern drone companies, it's like half of the leadership of Chula Vista is high placed in Axon and high placed in Skydio. And because Chula Vista was one of the first agencies, Huntington Beach was another one, that were in early and were vocal about it and were sharing information, and as a result became thought leaders. And one of my favorite sayings is, in the valley of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And those initial thought leaders had a profound impact on the industry and the way people viewed drones. And to this day are still having that effect. There are a handful of drone programs across the country that really had an outsized effect. And like so many times with law enforcement, it isn't often the big agencies that lead, because it's harder for a big agency to move. When LAPD first started looking at drones, a lot of the smaller agencies had already fielded them, and LAPD hit stiff opposition, from No Drone LA and these organizations that were going to try and prevent it because they saw it as a privacy risk. And so it's kind of those mid-size agencies, of 75 to 300 officers that really seem to be the initial thought leaders in any new technology.
Do you also provide services internationally?
So we deal with teams all over the world, and out of the United States, we tend to be dealing more with kind of, for lack of a better term, tier one units. We're dealing with more national level counterterrorism units than we are individual police departments.
What's it like working with organizations from different countries and cultures?
It is fascinating. It is fascinating. Dealing with teams from different cultures, you see the quirks in individual countries. Like, there are countries that could care less about drones, but are ridiculously offended by tasers. There are other countries that could care less about tasers, but are ridiculously offended by tear gas. Or guns is another one where, there are countries in the world that the tactical teams don't even carry guns unless they can demonstrate that somebody's trying to kill them. Every culture has their quirks, but they all have the same need set, right? Like, if it's a tactical team, they need the ability to do outside reconnaissance and conduct a search, look at a facility, gather information, pictures, videos, figure out, what the location looks like, and then being able to scout it. And then if they have an interior problem, being able to scout the inside and safely enter. And so when you look at that, there's not that much diversity in the mission set. Some may have more maritime, some may have more rural, or, more forest or whatever, but the overlap there is pretty strong. For internal, the overlap is almost identical, whether it's, Team Diane or GSG9 or 22 SAS or the Met or, RCMP's ERT teams, they have a very similar interior mission need to any of the U.S. agencies, which is why I think Loki has been successful all over the world. I mean, there are teams using Loki now on all the continents in all 50 states, all of the provinces of Canada. And I think that you've seen, we just did some training with a variety of teams in Virginia, and we had, a Belgian DSU guy there. We had a variety of state and local agencies, a variety of different FBI field offices, and then a couple of national teams, all collaborating and working together on the same basic skill sets. So I do think that there's a lot of overlap there.
What have the past several years taught you about the use of drones in public safety?
Drones save lives. Full stop. Drone saves lives. I could see right away where this was going to be valuable, but it has panned out to be much more valuable than we thought. Obviously in a search and rescue context, you don't have to be a math major to figure out that drones help locate people. But whether it's a patrol officer searching for somebody and being able to figure out where they are using a drone with FLIR on it, or a SWAT team trying to search a house, or, a USAR team trying to find somebody that's buried under a structure, drones give us the ability to move your eyes to places you could never put your body and do it safely. And I think that when we look back 20 years from now, drones are going to be one of those technologies that were transformative. They are changing the way SWAT teams enter houses. They are changing the way police departments search for suspects at large. They are changing the way search and rescue teams find people. And I think we're still very early in the adaptation cycle of this thing. I don't know what the percentage of market penetration is for outdoor drones nationwide, but it's probably only 15 or 20%. Not every agency is using them. If they do, they don't know how to use them. I think by the time we are done for the law enforcement market, or for fire for that matter, anytime there's a public safety event, there will be a drone on scene before people are. And as we develop the ability to share that information and to provide that situational awareness, that drone will begin to stream into the patrol cars that are arriving or into the fire trucks that are arriving, and will allow dispatch the ability to deploy assets safely and effectively while looking at the problem. And from a tactical standpoint, with software like ATAC, which was developed by US SOCOM, you have the ability to see situationally, where are my guys? I just went on a warrant with a team that was pulling down a murder suspect. And it was a complicated site, ridiculously complicated site, very proficient team, 60 different operators all hitting this compound would probably the best way to describe it. But sitting in the command post with the tactical commander and watching the thing evolve on drone, the drone overhead, and with ATAC, they can not only see the situational awareness of the drone, but they can see where their people are. Like, you can just see how that's going to dramatically transform it and really enhance safety of the responding officers.
What have you seen in terms of the public's acceptance of drones for public safety?
I think we're in an interesting time when it comes to our personal privacy. I think that whether it's our cell phones or our TVs with cameras, or, our refrigerators logging onto the internet to order their spare parts, we have given up a great deal of our privacy without even realizing that we've done it. So I think there is a very real and reasonable concern about the amount of information that is available from technology, drones being one of those technologies. There's been pretty stiff opposition to drones in a lot of sectors. And the argument is always that, police are going to spy on people with drones. And I think to some degree that's a little overblown, because we already have a very robust jurisprudence when it comes to privacy and search warrants, which is really well founded. There's a lot of moves to we're going to ban drones, or we're going to write specialized laws to refine those things. And especially here in California, we're very prone to passing a law for every single circumstance that could ever occur. And we still seem to get it wrong every time. But I think privacy is a very real concern. I think it's something we're going to have to address as we begin to see more things in the sky, as we see more data being streamed. A lot of the incidents that happen now, you'll see 15 different angles on because of people's ring cameras and pole cameras and body-worn cameras. And I think that drones are just an extension of that. I think that in places where you've seen kind of strong opposition to drones, what usually stops that is the child that is rescued from a river, or the child that is lost in the woods, or the injured person that is saved because, of a drone, or a fire that is fought better because of a drone. And I think that we're just in one of those periods of time where it's transitional, and we're going to have to figure out what role should these things play in our lives, and how are we going to regulate them. I'm in favor of less rather than more regulation, because I think we already have good law for privacy and those kinds of things, and for search and seizure. And what I found, living in California my whole life, is sometimes we take what is very effective general law and try to make it very specific. And in the process, we create a bunch of loopholes that later come back to haunt us. So I think we've got to be careful how we move with legislation about drones, but we are in a time of tremendous transformation between drones and computer vision and artificial intelligence. There's a confluence of developments there that I think on the one hand, people are going to take us to the Terminator and Skynet. People openly talk about that, which always scares me. But on the other hand, we could also be going into a place where we're going to recognize criminals sooner. We're going to prevent more crime. We're going to respond to crime faster. We're going to save more people that are savable. And I think as a society, we need to balance those two, but make informed, conscious choices, not freak out because, we hear something from an anti-drone group, or we hear something from an anti-China group, or something from a pro-China group. I think we need to take the time to really look at the technologies and figure out, how do we want this to develop, and what is the trade between our privacy and our safety?
What's next for AARDVARK Tactical?
With regard to drones, the Loki family is continuing to expand. We're going to be launching in the next couple of months here a two-way communication negotiation module that will allow Loki or Seguin or the Polcam to create a two-way conversation with a suspect, provide very high sensitive microphones that allow you to hear what's going on and be able to communicate effectively. Because as we're moving, we're moving away from the days of dynamic injuries. Breonna Taylor was the case that obviously created a lot of attention on it, but we are becoming less and less okay with dynamic entries and search warrants being done. And the result of that is the need for technology, the need to be able to negotiate with people remotely, to put devices into houses to clear them. So, there's a new poll camera that's coming out. There's a two-way communication module that's coming out. Loki is going to continue, Loki and Seguin and the whole Sky Hero family is going to continue to develop and broaden to give more capabilities within the same family. And then as far as we're concerned, my job is to constantly be looking at technology and new technological developments and figuring out, how can I lever this technology to protect my end user? So that is a constant loop for us, is everything that comes on the market, we look at it and go, how could this be used in a way that would decrease the likelihood of a tactical officer being killed or having to kill somebody? Because obviously, anytime a suspect with a gun and a police officer are in the same place, there's a potential for either of them to get killed. And if we can put distance between those two and slow down the event, and perhaps give this guy, who has made so many bad life decisions that a SWAT team has come to get him, give him more time to think about his decisions and try to encourage him to make the right decision without there having to be lethal conflict, then that's a technology that we're interested in.
John, is there anything that we missed that we should talk about?
I would encourage your listeners that are involved in public safety to really dig into this area and really take the time to learn what the technology can do for them. At the same time, encourage the industry to listen to the end user, because it's a new industry and it's well-funded and it's a lot of strong personalities. Sometimes there is the mindset that we're going to tell them how they should operate, and doesn't work in this market. We need to be focused on what the end user needs and developing products that meet their needs. I'm very hopeful that we're going to see more and more technology evolving that is very specific to the markets that we are in.
And for my final question, John, what message would you like to leave regarding the future of the drone industry?
To go back to what we said earlier, drones save lives. And as a culture, we need to not take fear of Skynet and predator drones, not allow that to prevent us from creating an opportunity to protect people and save people's lives. And I think that really needs an informed discussion. And I think that we need to be smarter. Like, as a society, we need to be smarter. We need to do more and not have polarized discussions, but actually really look at the nuance here and say, how do we do this in a way that is better for all of us? And I'm hopeful that with this industry and the discussion, in shows like yours that raise the issues and force people to think through it, that we're going to be able to accomplish that.
That's it for episode 401 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from John Becker of AARDVARK Tactical. I want to thank John for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about AARDVARK Tactical or want to connect with John, check out the webpage at aardvarktactical.com. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.